We have one more witness here. We have Ross, is it Gerlich? Bell, that part I can get, who is the state legislative chair of the Aerospace States Association, who will sort of complete this discussion of some of the fascinations and challenges associated with this very interesting and I think nascent technology. We're certainly going to see a lot more of it. Thank you, sir, for coming.
Well, thank you, Senator, and the committee. I apologize if I sound like a former politician speaking all over the place. I'm exhausted myself as I got stuck in that same storm in D.C., but rerouted to Phoenix last night, so I drove over here this morning.
Well, thank you for taking that major effort to get to us. We really appreciate it.
And I was kind of shocked the pilot didn't use autopilot as much as I'd hoped for a smoother flight, but turbulence is turbulence. With that, I'm here to represent the Aerospace States Association, which is a nonpartisan organization of lieutenant governors, governor-appointed delegates, and associate members from aerospace organizations and academia. ASA represents states' interests in federal aerospace and aviation policy development. ASA advocates on behalf of all 50 states for research and design funding, workforce training, economic development in aerospace and aviation, excellence in science, technology, engineering, and math education, and keeping states competitive in a global marketplace. I also have a dual role of working with the California chapter, which is chaired by Senator Anderson, and Vice Chair Bill Barato, who's a member of the California Assembly Select Committee on Air. Well, he was a former member because it just, with the election, changed, of the Committee on Aerospace Advisory Committee on the Assembly side with Assemblyman Marasucci at the time. As we know, and we've heard here, UAS systems can do quite a bit. As I've been told, they do the 3 Ds. They're dumb, dirty, and dangerous. So basically, they'll do stuff that's repetitive that people don't want to do over and over and over again because they're a robot. They're dirty because they'll go into places other people can't, and they're dangerous because they'll take on the tasks like firefighting where they can get in close where the human cannot get in close with the same results. As such, they offer a lot of opportunities. We've heard already about search and rescue, damage assessment, medical delivery. They're doing that right now in Europe under some tests where they're flying medical supplies out to North Sea oil rigs using UAVs. We also know, as we heard here also, on the entertainment use, so I won't go into that, so I'm going to make this a very short presentation. They deal with agriculture, as we discussed as well. And there you've seen UC Davis has also been testing stuff up in Napa Valley using the Yamaha helicopter UAS system. And there we're seeing North Dakota and other places where they have test sites taking a special interest in how they can do specific targeted agricultural dusting, which will also save environmental runoff and other activities there. So, on the environment, NASA has been working on weather conditions. You have crop counting, you have policing of harvesting of, for hunts and activities like that, which is of interest in areas of Alaska, Northern California, where they can make sure that the populations are monitored and protected without actually disturbing the population themselves due to the fact that a UAS can fly a lot quieter than, say, a helicopter or a plane doing the same kind of counting. 57 countries and 270 companies are currently manufacturing 960 UAS designs, which translates to roughly 20% increase in the number of manufacturing companies and a 30% increase in the number of countries with manufacturers, and 40% increase in systems since 2011. That's according to the AIAA, which is the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, publication Aerospace America. That was in their last roundup of UAS systems around the world. It's expected to go up exponentially again this year when they do it for 2015. The AUVSI, which we've heard from here and ASA works closely with, on their impact of unmanned aircraft systems, stated by 2025 the use of UAS could boost the U.S. economy by almost $82 billion. The Teal Group has estimated that number to be now $91 billion. $14.4 billion for California in particular, and roughly 100,000 new jobs total and 18,000 for California. So the question then comes is how is this going to move forward with the states, and where's the states' role and what the states are looking at? So one of the bases to look at is what the public's looking at and what they view UAS systems. In a Reuters poll that just came out on February 5th, first of all, said 73% of them wanted regulation in some form or another. 42% were opposed to basically amateur operators. They wanted professionals or experienced or police forces and stuff to operate them. They didn't want just the average person flying them. 30% said they were okay with that, 28% said they weren't too sure on it. As far as police use, 68% said that using UAS systems for police investigations was okay, whereas 62% said that it was a good deterrent to crime for police to use them, basically just flying around. What was more interesting is how the public viewed the media use of UAS systems, which they said 46% said the media shouldn't be able to use them, while 41% said that's okay, which I thought was significant, because most of the debate we've heard in the States is concern over how law enforcement and others would be using them, not much talk about how the media would be using them. And so this poll kind of shows where the general public is in their concerns of what these UAS systems might be used for, which gets more to the privacy question. So, and I'll skip over the FAA test sites. As we know, they're active and they're testing everything from sensory avoidance to lost signal as it's flying over and all those type of other issues. But since we are on time here and I want to get ahead of it, I'll jump to what some of the states are doing. So basically, you've had 35 states just this last year introduce some type of legislation in regards to UAS, whether it's privacy, in regards to, I say, UAS privacy, whether it's how the law enforcement uses the data and how they collect it, to actual interactions between the private-public sector themselves with each other. Several states have started getting into how citizens should be using UAS systems. Some have started getting lists of what's okay. Others have gotten into how law enforcement can access third-party UAS data for investigations and how those might work. The states are also looking into concerns like, say, if you're hunting or fishing and somebody else then brings up a UAS system over you and disturbs what you're doing. They're not over you directly, they're to the side, but they're causing a problem. Several states have addressed that and asked that that be looked into as something that's illegal to do. Other states are looking at whether they should be able to use them for traffic enforcement, which is my personal worst type of drone use, as DC loves the red speeding cams. But so I think it was, I'm blanking on the state right now, but one state, it was Iowa, was particular that the state highway department could not use them for traffic enforcement on the highway system, which is interesting because regular flights of a manned plane can do traffic monitoring from the air and then call down for the police officer to go pull the person over. In Iowa, they didn't like that because they felt that it was, I'm not sure, but they felt it was a little bit different that you didn't have the officer right there or somebody attached to that camera. So what you're seeing is a lot of states are trying to figure out where that balance is with the FAA regulations and where they get into the privacy, and it's a tough one. The FAA's new regs that everybody's now talked about, so I don't need to go over those much either, don't address privacy, which is a key thing that was left out, and that was because it's something that is being looked more at a state level consideration, because each state has its own rules of whether you're looking in somebody's window or not. That's whether you're doing it with a camera on your person, a telezoom, or you're doing it with a flying vehicle, it's still looking through the person's window. As I like to coin another phrase that's stolen from groups is, drones don't violate the law, people do, and they're the ones flying them. So with that, the Aerospace States Association has worked with AUVSI and several other groups, NCSL, to come up with a policy and how the states kind of can look at their privacy issues. And so, and along with the Council of State Governments. First, when it comes to the police and fire, it says states may consider requiring a warrant for government surveillance, which we are seeing in a lot of the legislation, of an individual or their property where the individual is specifically targeted. All other observation activities should not require a warrant to the extent allowed under the Supreme Court. Additionally, if there's not a specific person identified for surveillance in advance, it is generally not possible to obtain that warrant. In other words, if you see a crowd and you want to go back, then you go get the warrant to go back and look at the footage. A lot of states have also put termination periods for that footage that the police department can hold on to it at like 30 days. After that, the footage is gone if there's been no request through a warrant to look at it further. That's where we get into the data concerns. Some are worried about government use of data derived from warrantless observations. States may consider addressing this by prohibiting the repurposing of the data collected from government use of UAS and using it for big data type activities. States may consider prohibiting commercial UAS and model aircraft flights from tracking specific identifiable individuals without their consent. States can consider prohibiting weapons to be carried by any UAS, and one state actually did put that into law to make sure that a person doesn't say, hey, I want to use this, my weapon, my Second Amendment on my UAS and on my property and see what happens. States may consider endorsing the International Association of Chiefs of Police Aviation Committee recommended guidelines. And states may consider emphasizing that the FAA regulates commercial UAS and that they and model aircraft operations should be operated in a manner not to present a nuisance to people or property. So that's where we're at. The interest among the states for UAS systems, this is a quick final. When the test sites were put up for competition, quite a few states put in for the bids. I think it was 25 total. Now, there was a slow process in getting the testing sites designated. A lot of that was because they were trying to get the states to work together to consolidate. And if you look at a lot of the testing sites, there are multiple states in order to get the biggest play. Unfortunately, California was so excited about getting into the UAS systems test site, they submitted 2 competing bids, and so knocked each other out. So that's where the chapter came about, so that it didn't happen again. So California now has also submitted a Center of Excellence for UAS bid with UC Merced involved, UC Berkeley as the lead, and with multiple other states as part of that, to be able to get the education side of it brought and focused on in the state. And that COE now has kind of been delayed as well, as the FAA has a habit to do. And then on top of that, now we're seeing the FAA reauthorization has started this process this year. And of course, the Congress is very interested in finding out what the delays are with UAS systems. And so they're looking at that particular part of their reauthorization the closest. So I hope I was helpful after everybody else gave such excellent presentations.
Thank you very much. I think you were, and before we open it up for other questions, I'd like you just to follow up. My understanding is that most of the states are really dealing with the whole law enforcement side of things, the sort of the government part of, and that's very important, there's no doubt about it, but also the commercial side and the non-government side, the private sector, I think is also important because one's privacy rights can be violated by the private sector. In fact, in some instances, perhaps more significantly, because at least with the government, at least theoretically, we can challenge what the government's doing. So much of what goes on in the private sector, we really don't have knowledge about and no real ability to control it because we don't have that knowledge. So with that in mind, are there any other states that are addressing from the non-government side some regulations? You mentioned the use or individual tracking, others with drones. Anything that...
Well, the states haven't gotten, they're listing off things that are okay to do with it because FAA hasn't come out with the commercial regulator, well, they're coming out now. A lot of states have been hesitant to get into the commercial marketplace. They're just getting into, when they're talking the privacy stuff, more of the individual operator that's flying the Costco UAS system and what they're doing with that and then streaming it or videotaping it and sending it up on the web. So the states now are going to be getting into the question of where is the business regulatory side and how do you make sure that there's no violations there of people's rights when they're doing business. Now, a lot of states and talking to legislators will be hesitant to get into that realm because of what existing regulation there is to prevent businesses from spying on their customers. And what a UAS system changes, I guess. Is it a tool that changes that ballgame? There are questions about big data and gathering the big data and using that. And on the Hill, last Congress, Senator Rockefeller introduced and Senator Markey legislation to kind of watch the big data gathering and use there of using that information. Of course, everybody has an iPhone now or Android, and they're checking in everywhere anyways, and now there's software that can track where you are in the shopping aisle that's being experimented in Finland so that you can get ads right to your phone just based where you're walking at the time. So the question of what a UAS system would do differently there, not too much. The same goes for, Google Street as another example where they drove down the street taking everybody's picture, and then they had to compromise by blurring out the person. But you do have, and I always like to point this out, there are unmanned systems floating in orbit taking pictures every day of that so quality that you can zoom in on your house. You can see what your neighbor's backyard looks like and see even their car on their street. Now they're not taken so often that you could check daily for the new picture, but you are seeing it. So the question is, with UAS and the businesses, what are they doing different when they start using them? The problem is they haven't started using them that much besides in the motion picture industry, and that's kind of really the only area that you've seen a lot of activity. I hope that answered. And again, I'm rambling because I'm tired, so I apologize.
No, I don't see it rambling. What you're doing is telling us how big this issue is. Actually, I think that's a fair statement. And I have one last question, and then we'll open it up to my colleagues here. And I know Senator Monty, I know both Senator Monty and Senator Anderson are very interested in this particular issue, and interestingly enough, coming from different perspectives. So I think it will add to the questions, and I encourage those. I had one question for CAL FIRE, and that is if you would give us a little detail of how the introduction of unauthorized drones impacted your ability to do the work you were trying to do in fighting these fires.
So yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And some of that's detailed in that letter, but in particular, the real concern is this going to ground our air fleet when we're fighting fire, our air ops? Because we don't know, if we're talking about the hobbyist level drone, we don't know. There's no radio emission to let us know it's in our airspace. There's no, send back out of our airspace. The technology hasn't addressed that, the part of it just being in our airspace and us not being able to see it. Then if we do see it, we have no communication with the operator. So our only chance is to either get it out of our airspace or ground our air operations, because it could take an aircraft down. At the end of the day, that's the real risk.
And of course, that comes not just the privacy issue, that's the safety issue.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Senator Anderson, did you have any questions?
Not at this point.
Okay. Senator Monty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and your staff for organizing this. Thank all of you for being here, and looking forward to hearing the other panels as well. A question for the firefighting application. Is it correct that to date drones are used for photo gathering information? Is there any prospective use of applying retardant from an unmanned, unpiloted aircraft? Could that increase safety for firefighting?
Well, I'll give you my gut reaction, and then I'll see if Chief Alexander has something different. It kind of alludes to its retardant is dropped by a person, a thinking machine. So we don't want to take that element out of it, and I hate to refer still in such close time to our loss of Tanker 8-1. We would have, yes, that was a human tragedy, but at least we had a brain in the seat to make some decisions. So I personally don't know what that would look like if you're trying to make these last-minute decisions in the air from a remotely piloted position. And I'll turn it over to Chief Alexander for anything different.
And I would agree with that. Our imagination is unlimited, therefore what we can produce is unlimited, cost being a factor. What we have with our piloted aircraft, he's being able to take in that tactile information. What is the wind doing on that terrain? What are the fuel conditions? All these last minute detail-oriented conditions they're evaluating to apply it at the last minute to get the retardant exactly where they need it. Each drop is completely different. Each drop has a different intent to it. how we would program that in for a drone to be able to take in that information, make the decision, and apply it correctly, we're a ways out from that.
Thank you. And then I guess for any of you, in the hobbyist use of drones currently, are there any size limitations? Do you reach, is there a cap on how large an unpiloted aircraft can be for hobbyist use?
Yeah, I don't know for sure that there's a limit on that. I know that the FAA is going to require, at least at this point, that they be under 55 pounds in weight, which is not real large. Most of the small aircraft you see are really of the size that Dr. Chen sent to you. They're more in that order. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's helpful that we're looking at 55 pounds and less under FAA regulation. I guess final question then, other uses in agriculture. So one use that you described is just looking at crop patterns, irrigation patterns, et cetera. You did allude to the possible pesticide application. Is that being used anywhere where beyond gathering information that there's a application use through?
Yes. So thank you for asking this question so I can have a chance to respond. So in my lab, we do a drone-based remote sensing. So the majority of the people doing scientific data drones do remote sensing. But there's another side of the coin. It's called remote application through the drones. That's normally called crop dusting. So a few years ago, I already had a dream to put all the manned pilots out of their crop dusters, make it all unmanned so they can carry even more chemicals and fly even lower without fearing about crash. Actually safer and with minimized drift, so with much reduced environmental impacts to the groundwater and the soil quality, and so on and so forth. But however, on the other hand, anything you drop from a drone is prohibited from now. I think in one of the exhibitions, people try to spray the water, just open the water and just spray. There is a FAA guy just stand by, and he stopped it. So they don't do that. So don't release anything from the drone. That's also in February 15th new rule announced. So never get anything out of the drone, drop anything. Okay, that's illegal.
It's currently prohibited under
Yes,
FAA
prohibited.
to do an aerial application
Right.
of pesticide, even though there may be some benefits
Yes.
in terms of
Yeah.
safety containing drift, it would currently be prohibited.
Right. So on the other hand, I have a hidden agenda and trying to lobby. So under section 334, so for research purpose, probably we'll be able to convince FAA this is okay for the research purpose for now. So I'm trying.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know you're doing a lot of very exciting work there. And I also I wanted to ask as my final question, in developing all these fascinating technologies, is there any discussion about the safety aspects, any discussion about the privacy aspects, any discussion about the security aspects of this technology? Or is it really, we're in the technology business, we're the creators, and that's what we're going to do, and we'll leave those other issues perhaps to public policymakers, or we'll think about those issues later? I mean, is that part of the discussion, or is it straight, we're the thinkers, and that's what we're going to do. We're the innovators. We're going to innovate.
No,
Go ahead.
I would have to say that the people that are in this business are absolutely looking at that, because it can be looked upon as a threat to the success of the business. So yes, I mean, absolutely every single thing that you mentioned is thought about and looked at and discussed. Whether, the truth is, nobody wants to go fly something in somebody's backyard. I mean, I don't care who you are, you don't want that to happen, even if you own the aircraft. So, there is that discussion, and it crosses the board from every single aspect, safety, privacy, et cetera.
Did you want to also respond to that? Do you agree, or you're the research guy? What do you?
Yes, I'm a research guy, but if there's nobody buying my research, I'm not going to even start it. So I'm not a pure research guy. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineering educator. So to answer your question is, first of all, in general, all the high tech has pros and cons in the societal setting. So like you just said, it's not the drone itself. It's the guy who used the drone to do bad things, to preach other people's privacy issues. But on the other hand, we should differentiate different settings, like in our agriculture. Those trees don't care about their privacy. And so we can monitor them, so understand whether they are under stress or not. So we can adjust the irrigation scheduling, and so we can do optimal irrigation such that we can make the almond trees deliver the same thing but consume less water, making our society more sustainable. The same thing is true for the fertilizer. So the soil conditioning by using biochar applied to the soil. This is one of our projects we're doing. So to summarize my thinking is, as technology evolves and our wisdom regarding how to deal with the privacy is also developing. So when we have our human being, we will have this ability to deal with the privacy issues.
Thank you.
In fact, we just point out that your backyard was actually looked at every 16 days by the satellites, So and then Google Street Views, So there's a compromise. You cannot say that I do not want to compromise my privacy absolutely. There's always a trade-off.
Well, I think for some of us, just finding out that we've already compromised our privacy without even knowing it sort of begs the question too. So, and that's, I think, part of what we're going to be learning throughout these proceedings about in what ways we've already lost our privacy. And the question is, well, if we've already lost it, do we care if we lose it some more? Or if we've lost our privacy, is there any way we can get it back? I don't know what the answer is, but certainly we need to have that discussion. Senator Anderson had a question?
I do have a couple quick questions. And Ms. Walsh, I was hoping that you could answer this. So right now, if you're filming in a movie, you may have a helicopter with a cameraman inside, right?
Correct.
So in contrast to an unmanned vehicle, how does that work in comparison perhaps to cost and quality?
Oh, sure. So certainly operating a UAS is a much cheaper proposition, generally speaking, than a manned helicopter. Of course, it depends on the individual shoot, but generally speaking, yes, it's more cost effective. And in terms of the camera or the quality of the shot, we really don't sacrifice much in the way of quality when we use a UAS for filming. In fact, the State California Film Commission hosted a demonstration with one of the vendors who have been given an exemption a couple of weeks ago, and they mounted a camera onto the UAS that is the same type of camera that was used to shoot Avatar. So we're not really sacrificing quality by using the types of cameras that can be mounted onto a UAS versus the camera that would be used by a cameraman in a manned helicopter.
Now, I know it's relatively early, but do you have any safety results over what is a safer outcome?
We have operated these since the grants of exemption very little so far. Our companies, they've been used in commercial television ads more frequently than they have, but by our member companies, they've only been used just a handful of times, so I don't really have a lot of data on that, but so far, obviously, no accidents or injuries or anything to report.
Well, I would think the injury too would be from it hitting somebody as a result, as opposed to a helicopter crashing or.
Right.
I mean, there's no bodies on board, so
Right.
you wouldn't have that worry.
Yeah, and I would add too that I didn't discuss it too much in my testimony, but part of the restrictions under our exemptions establish perimeters for people involved in shooting. So the actor may be near the UAS, but everybody else who doesn't need to be on camera is behind an established perimeter of at least 100 feet, depending on the activity. So every effort is made to make sure that anybody who's not essential to the shot is not anywhere near the UAS when it's operating.
I read a story, and they were talking about all the applications, and I didn't recall anybody addressing this. Maybe you had, and I apologize, but one of the applications that I had read about is global warming. The mapping aspect, that's almost the same things that you described in relation to farming, they were doing in terms of monitoring global warming. Can anybody address that at all?